We're going to be discussing on the program this evening one of the more controversial aspects of this program, which is the exposés that we do on the Holocaust and what happened to 6 million Jews, Hashem Yikom Damam, who were murdered by the European Nazis, Yimach Shmam V'Zichram, may their names and memories be obliterated, during the darkest hour in the history of the Jewish people. But it wasn't just the German Nazis and the other European Nazi collaborators that murdered 6 million innocent Jews. The Jews were also victims of a traitorous Jewish leadership, and we're going to be discussing another aspect of this that we've never discussed before on this English language broadcast. In April 1944, Adolf Eichmann, Yemach Shmo V'Zichro, who was in charge of the German Nazi campaign of exterminating 6 million Jews, he was in charge of the Holocaust. Adolf Eichmann summoned the head of the Jewish agency in Hungary to a special meeting. He and the head of the Jewish agency in Hungary met. The guy who was murdering 12,000 Jewish men, women, and children in the gas chambers of the death camps every single day. The person who, before he was captured, and before he was executed in Israel, when he was captured by the Israeli authorities, said, "I jump in my grave laughing, knowing that I have murdered 6 million Jews." That's the type of monster we're talking about. And Adolf Eichmann, Yimach Shmo V'Zichro, called Joel Brandt or Joel Brandt in English, to a special meeting in Hungary. And Eichmann proposed to Brandt the following deal. He said to him, "Our German troops very badly need trucks. We need 10,000 trucks. And we need soap, and we need coffee, and we need tea and sugar. If you can get us coffee, tea, sugar, and soap for my troops, and if you can get us 10,000 trucks, I will give you 1 million live Jews. And not only that, just to prove to you that this is not some trick, that I really mean what I'm saying, we'll make an advance deal where you just give me 1/10 of what I want. I want 10,000 trucks. You just give me 1,000. You give me 1/10 of that. Give me 1,000 trucks. Give me 1/10 of the sugar and the coffee and the tea that I'm asking for. Give me just 1/10 of it, and I will immediately give you 100,000 live Jews. You can put them wherever you want, take them to wherever you want. Plus, I will immediately burn down and destroy all the death camps. I will burn down and destroy the gas chambers and the ovens and all the death camps." Now, Joel Brandt, the head of the Jewish agency in Hungary, knew that Eichmann was serious now, that this was a serious deal, and that the Nazis were going to keep this deal. I mean, they were hopelessly evil monsters, but they were also immoral beasts who just wanted coffee and tea, and for the sake of that, they were willing to let 1 million Jews out. And so Joel Brandt knew that Eichmann was going to keep his end of the bargain when he said that he would burn and destroy all the death camps. Because if the German Nazis had done that, right, as the first part of the deal, if they had burned and destroyed all the German Nazi death camps, at this point in the war, in April 1944, when this meeting took place, at this point in the war, the Germans could never have rebuilt those death camps. They couldn't. They were losing on both fronts. The Russians were beating them on the Eastern Front, and the Americans and the British were beating them on the Western Front. All of Germany was crumbling. German forces were crumbling. They were taking tremendous hits. There was no way in a situation like this, where they were in desperate military straits, economic straits, people were starving. I mean, it was desperate what was going on. There was no way under those circumstances they could rebuild the death camps. They just wouldn't be able to do it in those conditions. They didn't have the material to do it. They didn't have the manpower to do it. They didn't have the time to do it. They just couldn't do it. It couldn't have been done. It was impossible in a situation where their whole war front was crumbling all around them on all sides. They just couldn't do it. So Joel Brandt knew that if the Germans had destroyed those death camps then in April 1944, that would bring an end to the Holocaust. Not only would he get 1 million Jews, live Jews in his hands that were in German captivity, 1 million Jews would be saved immediately. Not only that, but he knew that there would be no further mass extermination of Jews in the Nazi concentration camps and the Nazi death camps, because the Nazi death camps would no longer exist. So at least 1 million live Jews would have been saved, and probably much more. Because at that time, about 3 million Jews had been murdered. There were still 3 million Jews that were yet to be murdered before the end of the war. And the destruction of those death camps would have almost certainly meant that the majority of those 3 million Jews that still hadn't been murdered would have survived. But at least 1 million live Jews, at least 1 million live Jews would have been saved immediately. That was certain. And all the Germans wanted in exchange was coffee and tea and sugar for their and 10,000 trucks for their troops. That's all they wanted. And it wouldn't have affected the war militarily. They were losing disastrously. It would have saved huge numbers of Jews, and in exchange for saving huge numbers of Jews, so they would have had coffee and tea and other things. So Joel Brandt immediately called all the Jewish leaders, the leaders of the Jewish Agency, Chaim Weizmann and all the other leaders of the Jewish Agency, and he called the leaders of the Jewish community in the land of Israel, which was occupied then by the British. And he notified all of them. He notified everybody about this deal, and he made it clear how important this deal would be, and he made it clear that it was obvious that the Germans were absolutely desperate, and that this was a chance to save large numbers of Jews who were being exterminated every day. Every day, 12,000 Jewish men, women, and children were being murdered in the gas chambers of the death camps alone. Just in the gas chambers of the death camps, 12,000 Jewish men, women, and children were being murdered every single day. And if all the gas chambers had been destroyed, that would have come to a halt immediately. So he said we could save at least 1 million Jews, maybe as many as 3 million. Let's move on this deal as quickly as possible. Brandt left Hungary to meet with Jewish Agency officials in Turkey. And the Jewish Agency officials then were going to send him to the land of Israel, where he could meet with other Jewish Agency officials in the land of Israel. But before he left on the train from Turkey to the land of Israel, the head of the Jabotinsky, the right-wing Jewish Jabotinsky Jews, who were called the revisionists, the Zionist revisionists, the head of the Zionist revisionist movement, who were the supporters of Zev Jabotinsky, who were the Jews, in this case they were the good guys, they were the ones that did want to save, they were the right-wing Jews, they were the Jews that did want to save all of the Jews in the Holocaust, but they weren't the establishment Jews. The head of that movement, of the good guys, the revisionist Zionists who supported Jabotinsky, and who eventually formed the Irgun Tzvai Leumi and Lehi, the groups that were good, that fought to save the Jews, the head of that group in Turkey met with Joel Brandt and told him right away, don't go to the land of Israel to meet Jewish Agency officials. They're going to hand you over to the British. The British wanted to arrest him, would have arrested him immediately, because the British wanted 6 million Jews to be murdered. In fact, they wanted all the Jews to be murdered. The British did not want the creation of a Jewish state. They wanted to continue to have a British colony in the land of Israel. And they figured if the Jews, and they knew that if many Jews survived the Holocaust, that they would go to the Jewish state, and there would definitely be a Jewish state. Certainly if millions of Jews survived the Holocaust, it certainly would have been a Jewish state, because they would have all been displaced, they all would have been refugees. They all would have had to go to the Jewish state. The whole world would have demanded that they go to the Jewish state, and the British wouldn't have been able to prevent the creation of a Jewish state. So the British, because they didn't want the creation of a Jewish state, because they wanted to continue to control the land of Israel, either directly through having British soldiers there or by having an Arab puppet leader there. They figured they could have an Arab puppet leader there. The British at all costs wanted to prevent the creation of a Jewish state. And so they actually wanted the Jews to be murdered during the Holocaust and did everything they could to facilitate the mass murder of the Jews. The British and the Americans did that. The Americans under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Yimach Shmo v'Zichro, also did everything they could to facilitate the mass murder of the Jews. The British and the Americans refused to bomb the roads and the rail lines leading to the death camps. They bombed every other road in Germany and destroyed every other road in Germany. The only roads in Europe they didn't bomb at this point in the war, because at this point in the war they had complete mastery over the skies. The only roads in Europe that they didn't bomb were the roads leading to the Nazi death camps. Those are the only roads they left intact to make sure the Germans can continue to wipe the Jews out and exterminate the Jews. And so the British wanted the Holocaust to go forward to prevent the creation of a Jewish state, and also because they were just Jew haters, and so were the leaders of the United States.